So we've made a new Blender add-on, and this add-on is designed to work once you've done your Marceau measure predictions. You can bring the asset into Blender. It will automatically sort out the node graph for you. So if there's any confusion around your node graph, that will be taken care of. The add-on will also allow you to do some initial edits, tweak some of the values. So if your predictions aren't quite right, you don't have to go all the way back to the start. You can edit this within Blender. And then finally, you can export out of Blender. So we'll bake all of those tweaks and edits that you've made into either a specular or a metallic workflow. And there's also some additional cool features in this add-on that allows you to look at a heat map and see whether the predictions are going to be good or not. So you can even do this long before you run through Marceau measure. You can do it at the point of capture. So let's get started. So the first thing you'll need to do is actually to install the add-on. So we've got a download link in the video, but once you have installed it, you should see it in your tab. And if not, you can go to Edit, Preferences, and it should come up as MXR Asset Editor. You can also check the version here. So we are probably going to be doing a lot of releases of this and adding new features. But as of today, this is version 1.3. But you might want to just check the version number here. Sometimes when you install an add-on, it will be unticked. So just make sure that it's ticked, and that will allow you to actually use it. We can now move on to the fun stuff. To open up your add-ons, if you're new to Blender, you can click this little arrow here. So here we can already see it's gone straight to MXR, and this is our tool. Another thing you can do is, if this is hidden, you can just hit N on the keyboard. So pressing N on the keyboard will just toggle this thing on and off. You'll see that there's four kind of main groups within this. We have the texture editor, we have the texture exporter, and then we have a few things that are currently under construction. We have a reality capture editor, so this will help make some sense of your reality capture scene, but I won't go through that today. And we also have some analytics tools, and this allows us to do heat maps. But for this video, we're mostly going to go over the texture editor and also the exporter. So the first thing that we can do is, again, we can see the version here. We'll want to import an asset. Now, before I import an asset, we can give it a name. I'm not too sure which one I'm going to pick. So to begin with, we'll want to import our mesh. I would favor you import an Alembic file. This is what Marceau reads, but you can import an OBJ or an FBX or anything like that. But we'll start off by just importing an object. So I've got a few example ones here. I think what I'll start off with is this hat. So we've got this Vans hat, and I've already got my mesh in this folder. So I'll just import that. And then the other thing we'll want to do is import the textures. So when you've done the export through Marceau, you would have seen that there's generation 1, generation 2, got wide gamut and narrow gamut. We'll want to import both the wide and the narrow gamut material properties. So what I propose, and this is what we usually do in our workflow, is we'll just predict on both. We'll predict on the wide gamut and the narrow gamut at the same time. Doesn't really add much to the time, maybe like a couple % here and there. We do have some information on our website, but then you can pick and choose. So you can do your predictions. You can be like, that looks amazing and wide. Roughness isn't as good. Maybe I'll swap to the narrow roughness prediction. That was pretty good. Maybe you want to mix the two together. So this is partly why we've built this add-on, is it's to allow you to actually manipulate those two different predictions and pick something that's right for the object and the scan that you've done. With that in mind, we've gone off on a bit of a tangent, but what we can now do is we can actually import the wide and the narrow folder. So you can, in Marceau, call these folders whatever you want, but what we want to do is make sure we label them properly so we can find them later on. First thing that we're going to do, find the wide folder for these materials. So we pick this hat, and we'll go into the wide folder here, and we can see all of the material properties. Now, I did these as EXRs. You could do them as JPEGs or PNGs, it doesn't really matter. The drop down here will allow you to pick whatever, but this is the folder that we're going to be reading from. And then we'll do the exact same for the narrow. Great, so if I expand that, we can see we've got the mesh, we've got wide, and we've got narrow. Now, if you had a folder that had EXRs and PNGs and JPEG all in one, then this drop down will show you all of those different options. We've only got EXR in this case, so it's only showing me the EXRs, but you can then pick. The other thing we can do is actually, we have some import options. This just affects how we read in that Alembic file. So if you're doing an OBJ or an FBX, this won't apply. So we can do an alignment. And what this is doing is, if you've captured things by hand, it will try and look at the orientation of the cameras and make sure things are leveled. Now, if you've done this through reality capture, their algorithm is pretty good at figuring out where the ground plane is. However, if you've used something else, such as Agisoft Metashapes, sometimes the alignment of your mesh is a little bit all over the place. So we just have an alignment tool here. The other thing that we can do is actually remove the cameras upon import. So an Alembic file has lots of cameras within it. We don't really need them for rendering. They're also gonna crowd our scene and be a little bit annoying and get in the way. So by default, this will remove all of the cameras. And then the final thing is it will actually set up the render settings for you. So we're going to be using cycles. This whole workflow is dependent on cycles, but you can untick this just in case you've already got some really good render settings and you don't want this add-on to just completely overwrite them. So we're pretty much ready to go. One more thing is we'll just give our object a name. So when we import it, we'll just call it mesh, but I want to call this Van's hat. And now we can go ahead and import our model. And what this is going to do is it's going to remove all those cameras, it's going to build the mesh, and it's also going to align things. And we can see the model here. So this is currently being displayed just as a mesh without any shading. So I'm going to remove this little import window and we can go over to the preview. These are the different render options that we have in Blender. If we go to viewport shading, it'll actually do some rendering for us. But what we'll notice is it's kind of black. It's a bit dark. Why is it dark? Well, it's dark because there's no lighting. We need to light the object to see what's going on. We've built a little H2I preview function here. All of these H2Is we've downloaded from Polyhaven. I would highly recommend going on their website. They've got some brilliant H2Is, but we've downloaded a couple for you that you can access through the plugin. Enable H2I preview and that will just load them up. You can pick between a bunch. So for most of my renders, I usually use this one. This one's also quite nice, quite famous as well. But there's a few others that you can pick from. So we've got like a photo studio. We've got a very kind of harsh light photography studio. And we've got a few like outdoory kind of ones. And the other thing we can do is actually rotate the H2I. So just play around with that, get it how you want. That's pretty much set up, but it doesn't look quite right. We want to fix this a bit. So when Marso does material predictions, it can be very dependent on how good our exposure solve is. For exposure solve, it's a little bit too bright, a little bit too dark. Maybe there's some ambient light that's kind of falling through or the scale slightly off. It can impact some of the material predictions. This tool is really just to help you do some minor fixes, minor adjustments, as well as swapping between the two different prediction models. So to go into that, we can come down to the adjustments tab here and you'll see a few different areas. So the first area we have is the render mode. This allows us to view the beauty pass or PBR passes like specular, metallic. We can then also decide what channel we want to be editing. So we can edit the base color, specular color, roughness and normals. And then we have a little dialog here, which is actually the editing process. So swapping between the narrow and the wide material, doing some adjustments maybe to the brightness. And if you want to get really advanced, you can also use these curves tool here. If we want to manipulate the object, we can either just look at the object and start tweaking parameters and kind of eyeball it. Or we can actually look at the channel we're editing and edit it according to how the channel should look. And for that reason, I've got this little sync button here. So if I want to look at the roughness channel, it will automatically select roughness as the thing that we're editing so that the two aren't out of sync. If I want to change the base color, it will then change it to the diffuse base color. So you can make sure it's always in sync. But there are occasions where I want to look at one channel, maybe I want to look at the beauty while I'm editing the diffuse. So if you unclick this, I can now look at the beauty and I'm still able to edit the diffuse even though I'm looking at the beauty pass. So what we'll look at now is just editing the roughness, because I think the roughness of this is a little bit too glossy. So if we go down to the roughness, we can see the roughness pass, and then I'll come over here to actually edit the roughness channel itself. So I mentioned earlier that we have a wide and a narrow material gamut. So we've got the narrow gamut here and we've got the wide gamut here, and they're loaded from those folders that we picked. So if I click on this arrow, it will pull all of that information from the narrow folder. And we can see there's quite a big difference between how the model predicts. And this is because this is kind of within that narrow range, this kind of object, like it didn't need to be predicted as a wide material gamut. So here we can see it's actually probably going to look a lot better because this is quite matte. It's very rough. If we look at the beauty, it already looks a lot better. I can keep swapping back and forth just to see how that looks, but to be honest with you, this looks really good with the narrow. Something we can also do is if you want to go a step further, is you can then just globally manipulate it. So let's say we want to make this even rougher. We can just grab this and increase it like so till the thing's pretty much white entirely. So this would be a very rough object. There we go. We can also just reset that here, and that looks pretty good. I'm going to do the same thing now with the normals. So if I jump to the normals tab, this is going to show you the normals in camera view space. So you're not going to see the actual normals on the object. You're just seeing how the normals kind of visually look to you. Just it's a little bit easier to edit with. At the moment, we're using the normals from the wide material gamut, but I'm going to swap this to the narrow because the narrow will perform slightly better in my opinion. And what we should see is a sudden sort of jump in intensity, which we can. And you can also start to see some of these threads appearing. This was only done, I believe, at 4K. If you went to 8K, you'd probably see all of the embroidery here. But just jumping back and forth again, we can see there's a big difference, and narrow is probably best on this particular object. I'm going to click unsync because I want to see the beauty pass. I want to see the impact of these normals. So let's go back to wide, go back to narrow. For the sake of what I'm showing you, I'm just going to make the roughness really glossy again. So we'll just go back to the roughness. We'll put this onto the wide, and this will just allow us to see the impact of the normals. So that's with the wide normals. You don't really see all of the detail. And if we go to the narrow, you can really see the detail there. So that looks pretty good. Just put the roughness back as well. So our hat is looking reasonable. The other thing that we want to do is just check, how is this going to come out as a metallic shader? So even though at the moment it looks okay, some of the values might be mathematically incorrect. If we come to our drop down, we can see we've also got the material properties for the metallic workflow. So if you come down to the metallic here, it doesn't look great. It's a bit too bright. This is a hat. It's not made out of metal, so this thing should be entirely black. Why is it coming out bright? The reason it's coming out bright is because our specular channel is sort of over predicting here, particularly in the white regions. So one thing you can do is just globally bring down the brightness of the specular, and we can already see that is fixing our logo. However, that's going to bring all of the values in the specular channel down. So if we go back to the specular view here, I'm just going to reset this. We can see it's quite dark, and that is where we started from. So all of this region isn't getting classified as a metal yet. It looks perfectly fine. It's only this white area that is getting overly predicted. Rather than doing this brightness that is going to bring everything down, we just want to attack this top bit. And this is where curves can be really powerful. So I'm going to try and pin this region here, and then we're going to bring down the white bit. So this is the highlights. It's quite a dark object, so it's a little bit fiddly. If we look at the metallic now, cool, it's mostly dark. So I'm just looking at the metallic channel now. I'm still editing the specular, but I'm just using this as a way to see at what point is this getting clipped. That looks pretty good. Cool. So if we go back to the beauty, it hasn't really changed anything too much on the beauty, but it will just mean this is correct. I'll find some other objects as well we can test this on. So that's pretty good. Another thing we can do is, like, I know what this object looks like. I would say it's a tiny bit too dark, so I'll just bring up the brightness of the base color. Awesome. That looks, honestly, this looks really good. So if you're happy with this, what you can then do is actually save it out. So you want to take all of these edits, export it, bake those maps, and then you can use it as any other shader. We can close our adjustment tab. We can even close the texture editor tab, and now we can go to the export tab. So the first thing that we'll want to do is select the object in question. So we'll grab our hat, and when we write these textures, it's going to write them with the name of the asset. The other thing we're going to come up with when we grab an asset is it's going to tell us what the native resolution is. So this was predicted at 4K. So it means that if we try and bake textures higher than 4K, it's not going to prohibit us, but we're not really getting any more information. So it's a bit of a waste of time. So we can do it at 4K, great. As soon as we go to something like 8K, we'll get this little warning saying, you know, it's higher than the native resolution. It's not recommended. I'm going to do this at 2K for the sake of this video. And then we can decide what do we want to bake. We can bake a metallic shader, we can bake a specular shader, we can bake both specular and metallic at the same time, and the naming conventions are going to match that of milestone measure. We can also do a few extra ones. So we have ambient occlusion. So if you're using this in web or game, this will bake ambient occlusion, in which case you'll want to tweak this. This is the amount of samples for the render. 512 is pretty good, but depending on your computer, you might want to change this. And then we can also create an ORM or an IRM map. So what this is another thing for game. It's to optimize your textures, but roughness and metallic and IOR, they're all single channel images. So you can essentially just pack it into one picture. So you don't need to have a roughness pass or a metallic or an IOR. You can just do one image that has red, green, and blue, but you replace red, green, and blue with IOR, roughness, and metallic. And then the game engine will read those out independently. Alternatively, there's another one where instead of IOR, you have ambient occlusion, sometimes called O, so an ORM map. So I'm going to tick the ambient occlusion, and I'm also going to tick the ORM map, and we'll show you what that looks like. Now we can decide what format we want. We've got 8-bit JPEG, got 8-bit PNG, 16-bit PNG, and 32-bit EXR. I'm going to go for the PNG file, and then we can pick what our output folder is. And I'm going to create a folder. I'm just going to call it bake_tutorial. Select that, hit accept, and then bake these textures. When you click bake, it might hang for a minute or two. Don't panic. It's just running the process. And if we go to our folder, so we can see the images starting to appear here. So those have all exported. So we can see we've got the metallic base color, we've got the metallic IOR, the metallic metalness as well. So this now comes out black because we graded it properly. We've got the gloss. We've got the specular diffuse, specular, we've got the roughness, we've got normals, and then this is that ambient occlusion map that I was telling you about. And then also this is our ORM map. So this has the ambient occlusion as the red channel, it's got the roughness of the green channel, and then it's got the metallic, which is empty here, as the blue channel.